what I need there. Should be good there. I think we're ready. Got 58. Here's that one. "38 seconds. Seconds. We're having a good time. I think when I hit that button, it'll switch me to my main cam. Audio levels look good. A little hot maybe on that mic. I'm going to move it down just a little bit here. And
Testing validates water quality and guides changes that must be made to the water to protect users and the facility. For all
we're gonna
pool chemicals may become a hazard when contaminated.
Stop playing sounds. That's an interesting little tidbit there that I got to figure out with my I think if I just go here, there. Oh. Okay. That's what I want right there. Hello, everybody. We are live. Originally, I was planning on having this be a little bit of a Q&A session for a CPO class I'm running. And people are busy, which was fine. And I planned on recording it. And I'm going to go through the CPO review calculations. So these are often given to CPO participants at the beginning or going into the second day of a CPO class. So like when I've taught 2-day classes before, one of the things I would do is give these with the materials. And then the first thing we would do on the second day is go over homework questions. If you're watching this after the fact and you have these questions, I hope I can help you and give you step-by-step answers so you can see what you've got going on. So with that said, I'm going to switch over to our
pool chemicals may become a hazard when
I don't want that sound to go. So I'm part of what this is also continuing to work on refining using my stream decks to be able to run this class. So here we are talking about review calculations. So I have these review calculations on my website. My website, leftcoastaquatics.com. So you can print out and work through these. And I'd highly encourage you to do that. I'll put it in the comments down below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, so that you can get the information and work through it. So future you, go do those, take a stab at those, try those. It's one of the best ways to learn is to actually try things and fail, and then make yourself do the work and then check your work. So with that said, we're going to move into this. So the first question that we run into is, what is the surface area of a circular spa with a 12-foot diameter? So we measure diameters in pools a lot, especially on circular bodies, because I can take a tape measure and say, hey, let's go over here, pull this tape measure across the circle, and take a measurement. Well, what happens is we actually need to know the radius to do this calculation. So that's the first thing we need to know, because the surface area is figured out by taking the radius times 3.14. So our radius is half our diameter. So we take our diameter of 12, because I can measure that with a tape measure. I can't accurately measure a radius with a tape measure. I mean, there's ways to do it, but it's a lot easier to measure that diameter. So I take our diameter divided by 2, which gives us 6. And then I plug that into my formula. So 6 times 3.14 gives you an area of 113 square feet. So that's the answer. What's the surface area of a circular spa with a 12-foot diameter? It's 113 square feet. So we're going to go to the next one. We're going to take what's the volume of the circular spa with a 12-foot diameter and a constant depth of 3.5. And when you take a CPO class, things are pretty straightforward in terms of constant depths or gradual slopes. When you are trying to figure this out on pools that you might find in the wild, you're going to approximate and you're going to do your best guess. So in this situation, the volume of that circular spa with a 12-foot diameter and a constant depth of 3.5 feet, our volume is our area, surface area, times our average depth times 7.5. And what that 7.5 is there's 7.5 gallons. It's 7.48 if you're particularly particular for engineering purposes. But for the purposes of a Pool and Hot Tub Alliance CPO class, it's 7.5. So if I had a 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot box, I could pour 7.5 gallons of water into that box. So to find our area, which we just did in the previous question, we go 6 times 3.14. That gives us that area of 113 square feet. We then plug that in. So our area times our average depth times 7.5 gives us a volume of about 3,000 gallons. 2,966.25 gallons. And so when you take a CPO class, keep in mind on the test, it's not going to be 2,000, it's multiple guess. So it's not going to start out with like A is 2,966.2, then B is 2,967.3, and C is, whatever close. It's going to be like it's 113 gallons, 3,000 gallons, 3,800 gallons, and 100 or 11,300 gallons. It's going to be pretty easy to figure out if you walk through the steps right. If you stop at that 113, you might have the wrong answer. The surface area of that circular spa is very different than the number of gallons it takes to fill that spa up. So with that said, we're going to move on to the next question. So what's the surface area of a rectangular pool with a length of 105 feet and a width of 45 feet? And I really want to stress to everyone taking these tests and in life in general as a pool operator, check your units. Your units matter. There's a big difference between 45 yards and 45 feet. These homework questions kind of mess with you a little bit. If I remember right on the pool operator test, it's not quite as bad. So to find our surface area, we take our length times our width, but we have to be in the same units. So what we're going to do, we're going to walk through and convert that 45 yards to feet. So a really good resource if you're ever struggling. And again, CPO tests are open book. So I recommend dog-earing your book or getting like those little flags that help stick out of your book. So let's see here. Let me find it real quick. There's a useful on page 26 in the newest edition as I'm filming this. There's a little table that has all those measurements. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had somebody taking a CPO test and been like, how many yards are in a foot? Or how many feet are in a yard? I know this. I've known this since I was like a tiny child, but I can't remember right now because I have a little bit of test anxiety. And if I don't pass this class, I'm not going to keep my job. Use your book. Remember, page 26 on this edition is a reference for you. So 45 yards is 135 feet. So now that we know that, we can take our surface area, which is our length times our width. So 105 times 135. And that gives us a surface area of, drum roll please, 14,175 square feet. So that would be the answer there. Make sure you answer the question that it's asking you. You don't have a depth, so you can't figure out the pool volume. Surface area, again, is good for pool cover blanket sizing. It's good for measuring surfaces for bather load in some codes. It's also useful for determining like how much surfacing you'll need for that body of water. That's one of the dimensions that you would need. So moving on to question 4, what is the volume of a rectangular pool with a length of 46 feet, a width of 24 feet, a depth ranging from 4 feet in the shallow end to 8 feet in the deep end? So I got a length, I got a width, and I got an average depth. Well, I have a couple depths, so I'm going to be able to figure out the average. So our volume is our length times our width, or the surface area, depending on however it's easier for you to keep track of, times our average depth, times 7.5. And again, that 7.5 at the end is really important because it converts cubic feet to gallons of water. So our surface area is 40, everything's in feet, right? We want to make sure we check our units. Feet, 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 feet. How many feet do you need? 46 feet times 24 feet is, my Surrey is triggering. Stop it. My Surrey is acting up on my iPad that I'm using as another controller. So the surface area in that body of water is about 1,104 square feet. And so we take that and plug it back into our calculation. So the average depth, for the purpose of this class, and really for most of the math you're going to do as a pool operator, you just need to know the average. And to do that, you take the depth in the shallowest part you're measuring to the depth in the deepest part, add them together, and divide by 2. And that's going to give you the average. So in this situation, we have we start at 4 feet, we end at 8 feet. So 4 plus 8 is 12, divided by 2 will give us an average depth of 6 feet. So now I have a length, a width, an average depth, and that really important fourth piece, which is our converting cubic feet to gallons. So we multiply this all across. 1,104 square feet times 6, which is our average depth, times 7.5 gives us a volume of, drum roll please, 49,680 gallons, or about 50,000 gallons. Next question. What is the surface area of a rectangular pool with a length of 75 yards and a width of 50 feet? So first thing you're going to catch there, our units are different. We have 75 yards and 50 feet. So we've got to convert that 50 feet or 75 yards into feet so we can work in the same units. All of our measurements for the volume calculations you find in the Imperial CPO class, so English units, or as some people jokingly recall, non-science units, we need to be in feet. So we convert that 75 yards into feet by taking 75 yards times 3, and it gives us 225 feet. Our surface area then is 50 times 225, which gives us a surface area of 11,250 square feet. And that's all we can do in that question. We don't have any depths. We don't have any flows. We've got none of that stuff. So now we can do a volume calculation. I'm going to take a quick drink to wet my whistle. So what's the volume of a rectangular pool with a length of 75 feet, a width of 50 feet, and a depth ranging from 3.5 feet in the shallow end to 12 feet in the deep end? So my first calculation, my first thing that triggers in my mind is we got feet everywhere. No conversions necessary. So good first step. I'm going to need to figure out that average depth, but I can do this. This is a pretty straightforward question. So probably the first thing I'm going to do is find my surface area. So I'm going to take that length times our width. So we take our 75 feet times our 50 feet, and that gives us, what does that give us? 3,750 square feet of pool area. That's how much area is on the surface of the water. Now we got to figure out that average depth. So we take our number, our depth in the shallow end, plus our depth in the deep end, and then we divide that answer by 2. So that's going to give us an average depth of 7.75 feet. Now I got all my parts and pieces. I got my surface area, which is just length times width. I have my average depth, and I know I multiply that answer by 7.5 to get the number of gallons that are present. And what does that give us? That gives us a volume of 217,969 gallons, about 218,000 gallons. And that'll be close enough for any answers or any problems that you're going to run into for the purposes of a generalized CPO test. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit and go into a saturation index for water that has a total alkalinity of 100 parts per million, a pH of 7.3, a calcium hardness of 250 parts per million, a temperature of 67 degrees Fahrenheit, and a total dissolved solid of 1,500 parts per million. And then if it's not balanced, we're going to fix it. So the first thing I see on this is that water temperature is darn cold. I don't know too many people that like to swim in 67-degree water. So let's see what we end up with, though, because this could be a pool that's winterized, and we don't want it to cause damage during that off season. So this is where these tables are really handy. I've saved these on my website. So at leftcoastaquatics.com, you can go and download these to play with for working on your pool or any other pool for the purposes of the class. So we plug in all of our values down the column. So we have 7.3 as the value, 67 degrees as the temperature, 250 as the calcium, total alkalinity is 100, and our total dissolved solids is 1,500. And then we look, whether it's on the worksheet or in your textbook, it'd be chapter 6 in your textbook in the water balance chapter. And at the end of that chapter, there's a really handy little cheat sheet if you forget it from, you lose the worksheet. And that's on page 69 of the edition, the current edition. And it gives you the conversions. So you have your entered value over yonder, and then it's the factor. So again, this is not an exact science. This is just to give you a general idea of, is the water trying to pull minerals out of it, or is it trying to deposit and scale? So we go down our table. And then again, if you remember from other videos, or if you was the first time seeing it, when a value falls between two numbers, you go to the next highest value. So we'll see that on our temperature of 67 degrees. 67 degrees on the chart, 66 degrees gives us a value of 0.5. So we're above that, so we go to the next highest value. So our factor there is 0.6. Our hardness factor is 2.0. Our alkalinity factor is 2.0. And that gives us a subtotal of 11.9. And then here's something new. This was new to me in this new revision of the CPO class, is the total dissolved solid factors changed. It used to be if it was less than 1,500 parts per million, you subtract 12.1. Now, if it's over 1,500 parts per million and in different ranges, you're going to subtract more. So it helps you tune in just a little bit tighter on what you're dealing with. But in this situation, we're going to subtract 12.2. And that gets, so we take our 11.9 minus 12.2, and that gives us a value of minus 0.3. And now that minus 0.3 is on the lower end of the balanced range. But remember what we looked at first thing. Our pH is a little bit out of the ideal range that the CDC and the PHTA want us at 7.3, just a smidge low. But our temperature is really low. That temperature is significantly lower than most swimmers would want to do. So when we relook at this, let's nudge that pH up just a touch and get that temperature back up in a normal operating range for most pools, closer to 80 degrees. The other values are going to stay the same. And now let's work through this problem. So our new value is 7.5. We go bump up to 0.7 on our temperature. 2.0 calcium hardness factor is still the same. Total alkalinity factor is still the same. And that gives us a subtotal of 12.2. Our TDS is still in that same range. So we subtract 12.2. And that gives us spot on 0.0 and balanced. It's a nice place to be. Again, we're looking for a range of minus 0.3 to plus 0.5. Again, another change in this revision of the CPO class. Another saturation index question. I'll run through this one just a smidge quicker if you want to take it step by step, bounce back onto the last one. So we start with our table and we enter down all of our values. Then we look up our factors. pH we enter at just as we test at 8.2. That's a red flag to me. That pH of 8.2 is not good. That's out of our range. That's out of the range that most codes will still allow you to operate in. So you're going to need to address that. Temperature of 78, a little chilly, but not bad. Calcium hardness, a little low, but looks fine. Total alkalinity, right smack in the middle of the range we want. When we add all those up, we get a value of 12.8. We then subtract, we look up on our table of TDS values. With a TDS of 500, we subtract 12.1. And so that gives us a pool that is very scale farming. And really, if you look at pH as one of the biggest drivers there, that pH is so high off the charts, everything's going to want to come out of solution and scale on your walls. Let's get that pH kicked back down into our range. So at 7.6, let's keep the temperature the same. We typically don't adjust temperature for doing saturation index. It's good to be aware of, though, if you winterize a pool and leave it decommissioned for a while, you'll need to adjust accordingly. We enter our values. We look up the new factors, which again, all we did was lower the pH and it made a huge difference. And in this one, we will get a 0.1. So we're a plus 0.1, which is in our ideal range and balanced. All right, one more really quickly. You calculate the saturation index for water that has a total alkalinity of 70, a touch low. pH of 7.2, touch low. Calcium hardness of 200, it's okay. Temperature of 80, it's not very warm, so that's not going to raise our values. And a total dissolved solids of 500. If it's not balanced, fix it. And after you've done these for a while, you're going to be able to look at those values and be able to say, all of those are low, it's going to be scaling, or corrosive, I'm sorry. It's going to be wanting to get itself into equilibrium and pull minerals and nutrients out of the water or out of the surfaces. So we work down our column. We enter our pH as tested. We look up the other four values. And when we add those up, we get a minus 0.4, which is corrosive. We're just barely outside of our range. So, and this is a lot of times where your CPO test will stop. Your CPO test will say, here's the values, you tell me the saturation index. Done. There's no ambiguity of, well, I would change this or I would change this, because sometimes we're going to change things differently. There's a lot of different ways to get to the same end result as long as you're staying within all those guidelines. For me personally, at my pools, I tend to run the pH a touch lower. I love to have that extra capacity for my chlorine to have a higher ORP, which we can talk about when you take a full class from me or for another video. So we're going to bump that pH up a bit. Just a nudge that pH up to 7.4. Keep our temperature the same. Hardness is going to be the same. Alkalinity, we're going to bump that up to 100. Little low on the low end. Your pH might be a little bouncy at that lower alkalinity. So we get it up to 100. It's going to be a little more stable. Now we add up our new values, enter the pH just as we measured it, look up the rest of the values on the table, and that's going to give us a new value of minus 0.1. So we're still a little corrosive, not bad, but we're in the range. We're definitely clearly in the range. And so depending on what you use, so we're going to move on to the next little bit here. Actually, I want that one. And then put me back on.
Pool chemicals may become a hazard.
Stop it. All right. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the alkalinity from 70 parts per million to 100 parts per million in a 250,000 gallon pool using sodium bicarbonate. Pretty straightforward. This is kind of meat and potatoes pool operator stuff. You can do this with doing basic algebra, or you can use the cheat sheets. And I love these cheat sheets. I print them out. I create them when I'm doing this math because I've done enough of these. I can draw it out without having the form, but the form is available as a template on my website. So what this cheat says is we enter our values of the chemical we're using. So right now, as this form sits, 1.4 pounds raises 10,000 gallons of water, 10 parts per million to increase alkalinity. We have a 250,000 gallon pool. So then we divide downwards in the columns. So that column is going to divide down and give us a value of 25. So our pool is 25 times larger than kind of the sample dose. So that gives us an idea of how much bigger each step is going to take for our pool. And then we need to figure out how many times we want to repeat each of those steps from the label, whether it's from the chemical label or it's coming to you from the chemical lookup chart that we have in the CPO book and is available as references, right? All sorts of places. So we want to do a 30 part per million change. So this is really important to keep straight. You're at 70 and you want to get to 100. So to figure out that change, you take where you want to be minus where you are, and that gives you how many steps you're going to have to take. And then we divide down the column. So 30 divided by 10 parts per million gives 3. And then we multiply across at the bottom. So 1.4 pounds times 25 times 3 gives us, drum roll please, and get me out of the way, 105 pounds of sodium bicarbonate. Depending on I missed it. So if you need to be conscientious of, thank you for the feedback on making sure that my mic wasn't muted there. It's important to make sure you're aware of that sizes. That 100 pounds of bicarb is quite a bit of chemical. Depending on the size of your pool, you need to be aware of that. And this calculation helps you. So
Pool chemicals may be...
Next question that we're going to come across here is, you have an L-shaped pool that is 175 feet long and 50 feet wide with a diving well that is 25 feet by 25 feet. How many gallons of water are lost each week if the pool loses 1/4 inch a day due to evaporation and an additional 1 inch per week due to backwash and a leak? So with this one, it's important to think about the picture. What we're going to do is, it's a good number to know off the top of your head or have written down somewhere how many gallons are in 1 inch of water, so you can kind of track your water consumption if you don't have a water meter on your fill valves. So that's what this question is really diving into. So we have this L-shaped pool. So what we're going to do is we're going to find out the volume in each area, because we can't really do the math to cut it up and do it all at once. So we're going to take the area, the big part, and then we're going to find the area of the dive well, and we're going to add those together. I'm going to switch views here to help.
Pool chemical...
It played again. I got to figure that out. Okay, so our next step, we're going to take that 50 times 175, and it's going to give us that value of that part. And then we're going to take 25 times 25, and that's going to give us the value of that part. And we add them together to get 9,375 square feet. So 1 inch is 0.0833 feet. So what we're going to do is we have our surface area times our depth, 1 inch, times 7.5 to convert that into gallons. And that's going to give us a value that we're going to plug in back here. So we're going to take our surface area times 0.833. It's a volume calculation. So surface area times depth, 1 inch, times 0.7 or times 7.5, which is the number of gallons of water in 1 cubic foot of water, times 2.75 inches. And that's the number of inches we lost over the week. What that tells us is 9375 times 0.0833 feet times 7.5 times 2.7, about 16,000 gallons of water over the course of a week. So switching to the next one, I'm going to see if I can get that background off. I don't want that blank on the background. I'm almost done. All right, next question. So adjust the calcium hardness from 75 parts per million to 150 parts per million in a 150,000 gallon pool using 77% calcium chloride. Again, so what we're going to get from our label or from Appendix B2 in the chemical is 1.2 pounds of this strength of calcium chloride, raises 10,000 gallons, 10 parts per million. Our pool's 150,000 gallons, or 15 times bigger than the recipe calls for. And then we're going to change 75. We're going from 75 to 150. So that's 7.5 times bigger than our recipe. Then we're going to multiply across that bottom column, 1.2 pounds times 15 times 7.5 gives us 135 pounds of calcium chloride. And then just another quick aside here, just make sure you don't add that all at once. Calcium chloride is highly exothermic, means when it reacts with water, it melts. I've seen the sides of buckets and barrels melt out by putting too much calcium chloride in as you dilute it in water. So this is a water balance issue. So we're not as concerned about making this, like fixing this on the spot to stay open. What we're going to do is we'll add 50 pounds at closing, and then we'll add 50 pounds the next night, and then we'll test and see what further progress we need to make.
Pool chemical.
How much cyanuric acid or stabilizer or sunscreen for our chlorine is needed to raise the stabilizer level in a 75,000 gallon pool from 0 to 30 parts per million? This could be an example of refilling this pool after the winter. Same sheet, 13 ounces, raises 10,000 gallons, 10 parts per million. I enter my pool and divide down. So 75,000 divided by 10,000 means my pool is 7.5 times bigger than the other example, or than the recipe. And I want to do a 30 part per million change. I'm at 0 and I want to get to 30, which is 30. Pretty straightforward. Divide down and that gives me 3. So then I multiply across that bottom row. 13 ounces times 7.5 times 3 gives me 292.5 ounces, which is helpful, but really we want to know this in pounds. So what we're going to do is we're going to look back on that math cheat sheet and take that 292.5 ounces and divide by 16, which tells me we need about 18.25 pounds. If you go into a store and say, I need 292.5 ounces of this chemical, they'll probably sell you little tiny containers and sell you a bunch of them for a really high margin and a really high profit. So know these math numbers so you can make yourself feel better and have a better working number of how the industry would do this. All right, moving on to the next one. How much calcium hypochlorite is needed to breakpoint chlorinate a 125,000 gallon pool if the combined chlorine is 4 parts per million, or 0.4 parts per million, and the free chlorine is 1.0 parts per million? So this one, what we're going to try to do, it's a chemical change question, but the biggest thing that we got to figure out is how much change do we want? We're using calcium hypochlorite, so we know from the product label that 2 ounces raises 10,000 gallons, 1 part per million. We're then going to plug in our pool. It's 125,000 gallons, and we divide down that column, and we get 12.5. So it's 12.5 times bigger than our product label calls for, our base recipe. In this one, this is giving us our desired change, and this is something that I kind of struggled to wrap my head around early on, is to reach our breakpoint chlorination, our desired chemical change is 10 times our combined chlorine minus what we've already got there. And so in this case, our desired endpoint is 4.0 parts per million. But we already have 1 part per million of free chlorine. So that means our change is 3 parts per million. We want to get to 4, we're at 1. We divide down, and that gives us 3. Multiply across the bottom, and that gives you 75 ounces. Again, this is one you want to measure in pounds. 75 ounces divided by 16 gives you 4.69 pounds to achieve that breakpoint chlorination to try to reduce chloramines. A couple more questions here. You guys are doing great following along if you've stuck around this long. An accidental fecal release occurs in a pool. The state health department requires raising the free chlorine level from 4 to 20 parts per million for 20 hours. How many gallons of sodium hypochlorite would be needed for an 80,000 gallon pool? And this is a traditional example of a word problem that gives you a lot more information than you need to start with. What this really says is we're at 4, we want to get to 20, and we have an 80,000 gallon pool using sodium hypochlorite or liquid bleach. So we can jump over to this table. 10.7 fluid ounces raises 10,000 gallons, 1 part per million. We've got an 80,000 gallon pool divided by 10,000 gallons. Means our pool's 8 times bigger than our dosage. Our desired chemical change, so what could that be? We're at 4, and we want to get to 20. So in that case, what you're going to do, your desired change is 16. We take our 16 divided by 1 in this case. For your water balance parameters, it's usually a 10 part per million change, but with these chlorine parameters, it's usually a 1 part per million change. 16 divided by 1 is 16, and we multiply all the way across the bottom. So we take our 10.7 times 8 times 16, and it gives us 1,369.6 fluid ounces. Again, that's not a very helpful number to me. It's somewhere 10 gallons-ish. So let's figure out how many gallons it actually is. So we'll take that number and we'll divide it by 128. That's how many fluid ounces are in a gallon. And that gives us 10.7 gallons. So in this case, we would need at least, 11 individual gallon jugs or like a 15-gallon carboy, which is pretty common. We're going to switch gears just a little bit, and this is getting into turnover calculations. These ones are pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you 2 values. You tell me the third. I will give you a pool volume and a turnover. You tell me the flow rate. I'll give you a pool volume and a flow rate. You tell me the turnover. Health codes are usually written in turnover times. So you're basically saying, am I less than the turnover time? I'm good. If you're longer than it, you're out of compliance. And then what you're going to do with that will vary based off of your local jurisdiction. So with that said, we'll work through this. Our turnover rate is our pool volume divided by our flow rate divided by 60, because our flow rate's in gallons per minute. And this is going to convert it to hours. Turnover rates are usually measured in hours. So 3,500 divided by 150 gallons divided by 60 gives us the turnover in hours. So in this situation, 3,500 divided by 150 divided by 60 is 0.39 hours. If you want to know it in minutes, you multiply by 60 again, and that gives you 23.4 minutes. All right, here's one that we need to know. We have what's the flow rate needed for a 3,500 gallon spa based on that 30-minute turnover rate. 30 minutes is nice because it's also half an hour. So our flow rate in hours is divided by our pool volume, divided by our turnover rate, divided by 60. In this case, it's 3,500 divided by 0.5 divided by 60 gives us a necessary flow rate of 116.66 gallons. So in this situation, that is if we had a 30-minute turnover rate requirement by code, and we bounced back to this question, if we have that 150 gallons per minute flow rate, we're good. But when we get to 116, that means we're going to be out of compliance. So it's really important to know those numbers and what's your minimum flow rate to meet your desired code compliance. All right, we just have a couple more questions here. So we have a DE filter grid that has 8 elements, each measuring 2.5 feet by 9 inches wide. What's the square footage of this filter? Common question, DE filters, they're use filter elements that filter on both sides. So as those grids are in the water, they filter on this side and this side. So let's do some math. Length times width times height. Since the element has 2 sides, the total must be multiplied by 2. So we're 2.5 feet on one side and 0.75 feet, because we have to make those units the same. And we used, one of these problems used to have it where it was in cubic or square inches and it was a whole mess. Convert that 9 inches into feet and you're going to be on the right track. So 2.5 times 0.75 gives us 1.875 square feet of filter area on one side of the grid. But we have to remember DE filters filter on both sides. So we have to double that and then multiply by the number of elements. And that gives us 30 feet of total filter surface area. That would be important for sizing our filters and making sure we have enough filter area for those given flow rates. In this example, we have a sand filter that's 5 feet in diameter and has a 3-foot deep sand bed. How much filter surface area does this filter have? And this is another example of giving you a little more information than you need to figure out your surface area. That depth doesn't matter for these calculations. The depth matters for how effective your filter is going to work, but for doing these basic math and for filter sizing, you don't need to know that depth. So what we're looking at, this is another one of those radius times 3.14. Our diameter is 5 feet because I pulled my tape measure across and I can measure it. Our radius is 5 divided by 2, or 2.5 feet. So then we enter it as 2.5 times 2.5 times 3.14 gives us 19.63 square feet of filter area for that filter. That 3-foot diameter round sand filter has 19.63 square feet of filter area. We have, in this example, another turnover calculation. We have a 275,000 gallon pool that needs to turn over the water every 8 hours. What's the minimum flow rate we can do this with? So our flow rate equals our pool volume divided by our turnover rate in hours divided by 60 to give us the flow in gallons per minute. 275,000 divided by 5, or divided by 8, divided by 60 gives us a flow rate of 573 gallons per minute. So if this pool has an 8-hour code requirement, if the flow rate is 573 gallons per minute or faster, it's good. It's going to be in compliance. If it's 572 or lower, you're out of compliance and need to take steps to get it into compliance with an 8-hour turnover. Now, if the code required a 6-hour turnover, it would be a different number and it would be a higher flow rate. So the faster your turnover time is, the higher the flow rate you need to meet that. Our last question for the day, and thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. If you've made it this far, please help share this video out for people you know, or bookmark it away in case you need to come back to it and study these in the future, or you know somebody else that's taking a CPO class. We have a pool with a sand filter system that has a flow rate of 220 gallons per minute and an optimal filter media rate of 12 gallons per minute per square foot. What is the required square foot of filter area to meet this need? And this is another one of those ones where I know I've decided I'm going to use this product. This is the flow rate I need based off of code. How many filters do I need to buy? How much filter area do I need? So I take my flow rate divided by my filter media rate, or my filtering rate, and that gives me how many square feet I need. So if I take 220 divided by 12, that'll give me how many I need. And in this situation, the filter area I need is, drumroll, 18.33 square feet. And that, folks, is it. That is the CPO, the current edition, as I'm filming this on August 17th, 2022, the CPO homework questions that are made available by the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance. So in this situation, I went step by step on how to answer those. You can reference back to this. You can rewatch it again. If you have questions, you can reach out to me and I'll do the best I can to answer them. And that's a kind of a good overview of some examples of math questions you may see on a CPO test. Now, here's the fun thing. CPO test is all multiple guess, at least at this point. Open book, multiple guess. The answer will be right in front of you, but you still have to do the work and watch your steps to make sure you get the answer right. So with that, I've been Joe Andrews. Thank you so much for watching, and we're going to go ahead and end this.